The letter trembled in Victoria Rose's hands as she stood on the dusty platform of the Winnemucca, Nevada train station, watching the iron beast that had carried her across the country disappear into the shimmering heat of the August afternoon in 1883. She had arrived with nothing but a worn carpet bag, the clothes on her back, and a single photograph of the man who had promised her a new life through carefully penned letters. The photograph showed a stern-faced man with dark hair and a thick mustache, standing rigid in his Sunday best. Benjamin Zachary, cattle rancher, age 26, seeking a wife to help build a life in the Nevada territory. Victoria had responded to his advertisement out of desperation after her father's death left her orphaned and penniless in Boston at the age of 22. The alternative had been to accept the unwanted advances of her landlord or face the streets. Neither option had seemed remotely acceptable. The platform emptied quickly, families reuniting with warm embraces, businessmen hurrying toward waiting carriages. Victoria stood alone, clutching her bag, searching the dispersing crowd for anyone who might resemble the man in the photograph. The sun beat down mercilessly, so different from the mild summers she had known back east. Her travel dress, already rumpled and stained from the long journey, clung to her skin in the dry heat. A tall figure separated from the shade of the station building, moving toward her with long, purposeful strides. Victoria's breath caught as she took in the man approaching. He wore dusty work clothes, denim trousers worn soft with age, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but as he drew closer, she could see features that were younger, more open than the stern photograph had suggested. His jaw was strong, covered with a few days' worth of stubble, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green that reminded her of the ocean she had crossed so long ago. Miss Victoria Rose. His voice was deep, roughened by wind and weather, but there was an unexpected gentleness in it. Yes, that would be me. Mr. Zachary. She tried to keep her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. Benjamin Zachary, yes, madam, but most folks just call me Ben. He shifted his weight, suddenly looking younger than his 26 years, almost uncertain. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult. It was long, Victoria admitted, allowing herself a small smile. But I arrived safely, which is what matters. Ben nodded, his eyes taking in her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. She wondered what he saw. She knew she was not a beauty in the classical sense. Her face was too angular, her mouth too wide, her brown eyes too serious. But she had been told she had kind eyes, and her dark hair, though currently pinned in a travel-weary bun, was thick and lustrous when properly tended. I have a wagon waiting, Ben said, gesturing toward the street. The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I thought we might stop by the church first, if that suits you. Reverend Patterson is expecting us. I figured you would want to freshen up first, but the Reverend has another service to attend in the next town over tomorrow, so today would be best if you are not too exhausted. The reality of the situation struck Victoria with renewed force. She was to marry this stranger today. Within hours, she would be this man's wife, expected to perform all the duties that entailed. Her stomach tightened with a mixture of anxiety and something else she could not quite name. Today would be fine, she heard herself say. I understood the practical nature of this arrangement when I agreed to come. Something flickered in Ben's eyes at her words, but it passed too quickly for her to identify. Practical, he repeated softly. Yes, I suppose it is that. He offered his arm. Shall we? Victoria placed her hand lightly on his forearm, feeling the strength of muscle beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. He led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 draft horses, helping her up onto the seat with a hand that was calloused but careful. He placed her carpet bag in the back and climbed up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. The church was a simple white building at the edge of town, its steeple reaching optimistically toward the cloudless sky. Reverend Patterson turned out to be a kindly man in his 50s with graying hair and warm brown eyes. He asked few questions, having clearly been briefed by Ben already. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, with the Reverend's wife and the church caretaker serving as witnesses. Victoria found herself repeating vows in a voice that sounded distant to her own ears, promising to love, honor, and obey a man she had met less than an hour ago. Ben's responses were clear and steady, his hand warm and solid when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife and instructed Ben to kiss his bride, Victoria felt her breath catch. Ben leaned down slowly, giving her time to anticipate the touch of his lips against hers. The kiss was chaste, gentle, and mercifully brief, but Victoria felt it all the way to her toes. His lips were soft despite the rough stubble surrounding them, and he tasted faintly of coffee and something sweet, like honey. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Zachary," Reverend Patterson said warmly, shaking Ben's hand and patting Victoria's shoulder. "May the Lord bless your union with many happy years." They signed the marriage certificate, making it official in the eyes of both God and the territorial government. Victoria stared at her new signature, Victoria Rose Zachary, and felt the weight of her new identity settle over her shoulders. The ride to the ranch was quieter than Victoria had expected. Ben seemed lost in his own thoughts, his attention ostensibly on the horses and the dusty road ahead. The landscape around them was stark and beautiful in a way that took Victoria's breath away. Rolling hills dotted with sagebrush stretched in every direction, mountains rising purple and distant on the horizon. The sky seemed impossibly vast, unmarred by the smoke and buildings that had hemmed in her Boston existence. "It is beautiful," Victoria said softly, breaking the silence. "Different from what I am accustomed to, but beautiful nonetheless." Ben glanced at her, and for the first time she saw a genuine smile touch his lips. "It grows on you. When I first came out here 5 years ago, I thought it was the loneliest, harshest place on earth. Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "You are not from Nevada originally, then?" "Missouri," Ben said. "My family had a small farm there, but after my parents passed from fever, there was not much keeping me. My younger brother got the farm, and I headed west to make my own way. Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny I could, and finally bought my own spread 3 years back." "That must have taken considerable determination," Victoria said, impressed despite herself. Ben shrugged. "Just hard work and a bit of luck. The previous owner was heading back east, wanted to sell quick. I got a fair price for good land." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It is not a large operation, mind you. I run about 200 head of cattle, have a few horses. I employ 2 hands who help with the heavy work and the roundups. It provides a decent living, but it is not fancy." "I did not come seeking fancy," Victoria said honestly. "I came seeking stability and a place to belong." Ben's expression softened. "Then I hope you will find that here." He hesitated again, then added, "I want you to know, Victoria, I understand this is not the romantic beginning most women dream of for their marriages. But I promise you, I will do my best to be a good husband. I will provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect. I hope that in time, we might build something real together." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep in Victoria's chest. "That is all I could ask for, Ben." The ranch came into view as they crested a gentle rise. The house was a solid two-story structure built of wood and stone, larger and more substantial than Victoria had dared hope. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and she could see curtains in the windows, suggesting someone had made an effort to make the place homey. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, a stable, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse. "I know it is not much to look at," Ben said, a note of apology in his voice, "but it is sound and weathertight. I built most of it myself." "You built this?" Victoria could not keep the amazement from her voice. "With some help from the hands and a few neighbors," Ben admitted. "Took the better part of 2 years to get it finished proper." As they drew closer, 2 men emerged from the barn. One was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe 20 or so, with sandy hair and an open, friendly expression. "Mrs. Zachary," Ben said as he helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady at her waist. "These are my ranch hands. The distinguished gentleman there is Frank Miller, been working with me since I bought the place. And the young fellow is Tommy Raid, been here about a year now." Both men removed their hats respectfully. "Pleased to meet you, madam," Frank said, his voice gravelly but kind. "We have been looking forward to having a lady around the place." "We sure have," Tommy agreed enthusiastically. "Frank and I did our best to get the house ready for you, cleaned it top to bottom, even put fresh flowers in the bedroom." Victoria felt unexpected warmth at their thoughtfulness. "That is very kind of you both. Thank you." "Frank and Tommy stay in the bunkhouse," Ben explained, picking up her carpet bag. "They take their meals there mostly, but you are welcome to feed them in the main house if you prefer. My previous housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, used to cook for everyone, but she moved to San Francisco 6 months back to live with her daughter." "I am happy to cook for everyone," Victoria said. "It seems only practical if we are all working toward the same goals." Frank and Tommy exchanged pleased glances. "That is mighty generous of you, madam," Frank said. Ben led Victoria up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior was simple but clean, just as the men had promised. The main room served as both sitting area and dining room, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and true to Tommy's word, wildflowers brightened the table in a simple glass jar. "Kitchen is through there," Ben said, pointing to a doorway. "It has a good stove, and there is a well just outside with fresh water. Pantry is stocked with basics, but we will need to get you to town soon to purchase whatever else you might need." He moved toward the stairs. "Bedrooms are upstairs. There are 3, though I have only been using one." Victoria followed him up the narrow staircase, her heart beginning to pound again as she remembered what traditionally came next in a marriage. The largest bedroom was at the front of the house, with windows overlooking the approach to the ranch. Like the rest of the house, it was simply furnished with a large bed, a wardrobe, a dresser, and a washstand. The flowers Tommy had mentioned, more wildflowers in shades of yellow and purple, sat on the dresser in a small vase. Ben set her carpetbag down and turned to face her, suddenly looking uncertain again. "Victoria, I want you to know that I have no expectations for tonight. You have had a long journey, and this has been a day of considerable change. You can take one of the other rooms if you prefer, until you are more comfortable with the situation." Victoria studied her new husband's face, seeing genuine concern there and consideration for her feelings. In that moment, she made a decision. She had not come all this way to delay the inevitable, and something about this quiet, kind man made her want to try to make this work. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness, Ben," she said softly, "but we are married now. I understand what that means." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I would prefer we begin as we mean to go on, unless you would rather wait." Something heated in Ben's eyes, but his voice remained gentle. "I would not rather wait, but I want you to know that this does not have to be merely duty, Victoria. I would like it to be good for you too." His consideration, so different from the tales she had heard other women whisper about their wedding nights, made Victoria's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I do not know what to expect," she admitted. "My mother died when I was young, and I had no one to explain such things properly." Ben stepped closer, reaching out to cup her face gently in his calloused palm. "Then we will learn together. I promise to be gentle and patient. If anything I do causes you pain or fear, you tell me and I will stop." "Agreed, agreed," Victoria whispered. Ben's thumb brushed across her cheekbone with surprising tenderness. "You are beautiful," he said softly. "When I saw you on that platform, looking so brave and uncertain all at once, you took my breath away." "The photograph you sent did not do you justice either," Victoria admitted, allowing herself to lean slightly into his touch. "You look much kinder in person." A low chuckle rumbled in Ben's chest. "That photograph was taken right after I broke my arm falling off a horse. I was not feeling particularly kind that day." He lowered his hand and stepped back. "How about we have some supper first? You must be starving after your journey, then we can take our time with everything else." Grateful for the reprieve, Victoria nodded. They went downstairs, and Victoria explored the kitchen while Ben brought in supplies from the wagon. The kitchen was well equipped with a large cast iron stove, plenty of pots and pans, and a good stock of basic ingredients. Victoria found salt pork, beans, flour, and even some precious coffee. She set about making a simple meal, finding comfort in the familiar ritual of cooking. Ben returned as she was slicing bread and setting the table. He had removed his hat and washed up at the pump outside, his hair still damp and curling slightly. "Smells good," he said appreciatively. They sat down to eat together, and the conversation flowed more easily than Victoria had expected. Ben asked about her life in Boston, and she found herself telling him about her father's bookshop, how she had spent her childhood surrounded by stories and learning. When her father had fallen ill, she had tried to keep the shop running, but creditors and competitors had closed in quickly after his death. "I am sorry you lost him," Ben said, his voice rough with sympathy. "Losing parents is hard, no matter how old you are when it happens." "He was a good man," Victoria said softly. "He taught me to read and write, to think for myself. He used to say that an educated mind was the best defense against the cruelties of the world. He sounds like he was a wise man. I hope he would approve of your choice to come here to make a new start." "I think he would," Victoria said, realizing it was true. Her father had always encouraged her to be brave, to forge her own path. "He would have liked you, I think." After supper, Victoria washed the dishes while Ben went to check on the livestock one final time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible in their intensity. Victoria stood at the kitchen window, watching the colors shift and change, marveling at the beauty of this strange new world she had entered. When Ben returned, full darkness had fallen and Victoria had lit the lamps. He locked the door and checked the windows, habits of frontier life, she supposed. Then he turned to her, and the air between them suddenly felt charged with possibility and nervousness. "Would you like to go upstairs?" he asked quietly. Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. They climbed the stairs together, and in the bedroom, Ben lit another lamp, adjusting it to cast a soft, warm glow. Victoria stood uncertainly, unsure how to proceed. "Would you like some privacy to change?" Ben asked. I can step out for a few minutes." "Yes, please," Victoria said gratefully. Ben left, closing the door behind him. Victoria quickly unpacked her nightgown from her carpetbag and changed, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfastened the many buttons of her travel dress. She took down her hair, brushing it out until it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Looking at herself in the small mirror on the dresser, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked younger with her hair down, her eyes huge and dark in her pale face. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "May I come in?" Ben's voice asked. "Yes," Victoria said, wrapping her arms around herself. Ben entered and she saw he had changed into clean trousers and a simple shirt, his feet bare. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment just looking at her. "You are lovely," he said, his voice rough. "Truly lovely." He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When he was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, he stopped. "May I kiss you properly this time?" Victoria nodded, tilting her face up to his. This kiss was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding ceremony. Ben's mouth was warm and seeking, his lips moving against hers with a gentleness that belied the strength she could feel in the body so close to hers. His hands came up to frame her face, holding her as though she were something precious. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing harder. "Was that all right?" he asked. "Yes," Victoria whispered. "Very all right." Ben smiled and kissed her again, deeper this time, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips until she opened for him. The sensation was strange and new and utterly overwhelming. Heat pooled low in Victoria's belly, and she found herself swaying closer to him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. What followed was a slow, careful exploration. Ben was true to his word, patient and gentle, checking with her often to make sure she was comfortable. There was pain at first, as she had been warned there would be, but Ben was tender and attentive, his hands and mouth coaxing pleasure from her body, until the pain faded into something else entirely. When it was over, Victoria lay curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat. "Are you all right?" Ben asked, his fingers trailing gently through her hair. "I am," Victoria said, and realized it was true. She felt changed, marked in some fundamental way, but not unpleasantly. "Thank you for being kind." Ben pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You are my wife, Victoria. Of course I will be kind to you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Victoria felt safer than she had in months. The next weeks fell into a pattern that was both strange and comforting. Victoria rose early to make breakfast for Ben and the ranch hands, finding satisfaction in feeding hungry men good, hearty food. After the men headed out to work the cattle or mend fences or perform the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running, Victoria would tackle the housework. She swept and scrubbed, learning to battle the constant dust that infiltrated every corner. She tended the small vegetable garden behind the house that Mrs. Chen had started, coaxing tomatoes and beans and squash from the dry earth. In the afternoons, when the heat was most intense, she would often sit on the porch with mending or knitting, watching the landscape shimmer in the distance. Sometimes Ben would ride in to check on her, always with some excuse about needing a tool from the barn or wanting a drink of water. But Victoria noticed the way his eyes would seek her out, the small smile that would touch his lips when he saw her. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit together, sometimes reading, sometimes just talking. Ben had a small collection of books, and he seemed delighted to discover Victoria's love of reading. They would discuss the stories, debating characters and plots, and Victoria treasured those quiet moments of intellectual connection. At night, they would come together in the big bed, and slowly, Victoria began to understand the pleasure her body was capable of. Ben was an attentive lover, learning what made her gasp and arch against him, what touches made her melt. She learned his body, too, discovering the sensitive spots behind his ears, the way he shivered when she ran her fingers down his spine. But it was not all smooth sailing. About a month after Victoria's arrival, a summer storm rolled through with violent intensity. The rain came down in sheets, and thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. Victoria had always been afraid of storms, a fact she had not shared with Ben. She tried to hide her fear, but when lightning struck close enough to illuminate the bedroom like midday, she could not suppress her frightened cry. "Hey, what is wrong?" Ben asked, immediately alert. "Nothing, I am fine," Victoria said, her voice shaking. Another crash of thunder made her flinch, and Ben pulled her close against his chest. "You are afraid of storms." It was not a question. Victoria nodded against his shoulder, feeling foolish. "I know it is silly. I am a grown woman." "It is not silly," Ben said firmly. "Everyone is afraid of something." He tightened his arms around her. "When I was a boy, I was terrified of the dark. Used to make my brother sleep in the same room as me until I was nearly 12. "Truly?" Victoria asked, surprised by this admission. "Truly. My mother finally cured me of it by making me do the evening chores, fetching water and checking the animals after sunset. Forced me to face my fear, I suppose. Though I still do not much care for the dark, if I am being honest." They lay together, Ben's solid presence grounding her as the storm raged outside. He told her stories to distract her, tales of his early days on the ranch, mishaps and small victories. By the time the storm passed, Victoria felt closer to him than ever before. It was around this time that Victoria began to notice changes in her body. Her monthly courses, which had arrived regular as clockwork since she was 14, failed to appear. Her breasts felt tender, and certain smells that had never bothered her before now made her nauseated. She suspected what this meant, but she waited another 2 weeks to be certain before saying anything to Ben. She told him one evening after supper, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun set. "Ben, I believe I am with child." He turned to her so fast she thought he might injure his neck. "Truly? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." For a moment, Ben just stared at her, and Victoria felt a flutter of uncertainty. They had never discussed children, never talked about wanting them. What if he was not pleased? Then a smile broke across his face, wide and genuine, and full of such joy that Victoria felt her own face answering it. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. Then louder, "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close but carefully as though she might break. "This is wonderful news, Victoria, the best news." "You are happy then?" she asked, though his reaction had made it clear. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ben said. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You have given me so much, Victoria. A home that feels like more than just a house, companionship, and now this. I know our marriage started as a practical arrangement, but I need you to know, you have become so much more to me than I ever expected." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "You have become more to me as well, Ben. I came here expecting duty, but what I have found is something I never dared hope for." "What is that?" he asked softly. "A true partner, someone who respects me and values my thoughts, someone who is kind and gentle and strong all at once." She took a breath. "Someone I am beginning to love." Ben's eyes widened and she saw the shimmer of moisture in them. "You love me?" "I am beginning to, yes. Is that all right?" Instead of answering with words, Ben kissed her, pouring everything he felt into the press of his lips against hers. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have been falling in love with you since the day you stepped off that train," he confessed. "The way you held your head high even though you were clearly nervous. The way you did not hesitate to say your vows, to commit to this leap of faith. The way you make our house a home. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes. The way you look in the morning with the sun in your hair. I could go on for hours about all the ways I love you, Victoria Zachary." Victoria felt tears spill over, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Ben. Fully and completely." They held each other as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and Victoria felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. The next months brought their own challenges. Victoria's pregnancy progressed well, but the isolation of ranch life began to weigh on her. She missed having other women to talk to share the small joys and concerns of daily life. Ben, sensing her loneliness, began taking her to town more often. There, she met other ranch wives and formed tentative friendships. One woman in particular, Sarah Mills, became a close friend. Sarah lived on a neighboring ranch with her husband and 3 young children. She was warm and practical, and she took Victoria under her wing, teaching her about preparing for childbirth on the frontier and sharing the realities of motherhood. "The first few weeks after the baby comes are the hardest," Sarah told her one afternoon over tea in Victoria's kitchen. "You will be exhausted beyond belief, and everything will hurt, and the baby will seem to do nothing but cry and eat and soil diapers. But I promise, it gets better. And the moment that baby first smiles at you, really smiles, it makes everything worth it." As winter approached, Ben became increasingly protective of Victoria. He insisted she not overwork herself, hiring a young woman named Mary to come in twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry. He made sure the house was stocked with plenty of firewood and supplies in case they got snowed in. He even built a cradle, working on it in the barn during quiet moments and presenting it to Victoria one evening, his eyes shy and proud. "It is beautiful," Victoria said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "Our baby will be so comfortable in this." The baby was born on a cold February night in 1884, during a howling snowstorm that trapped them all at the ranch. Ben had ridden to fetch the doctor earlier in the day, but the storm came up so fast and fierce that they got caught on the way back. It was Sarah, who had come to stay with Victoria for the last weeks of her pregnancy, who helped deliver the baby. Victoria would never forget the fear in Ben's eyes as he paced outside the bedroom door, or the way his face transformed when Sarah finally called him in to meet his son. The baby was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that worked remarkably well. "A son," Ben breathed, taking the tiny bundle carefully in his large, work-roughened hands. "We have a son." Tears streamed unashamedly down his face as he looked at Victoria. "You are incredible. Thank you for this gift." They named him James Benjamin Zachary, after Ben's father and himself. Little James was a good baby, alert and curious about the world around him. Ben was besotted from the first moment, getting up in the night to help with feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. Victoria watched her husband with their child and fell even more deeply in love. This strong, capable man who could work cattle and break horses and build houses with his bare hands was rendered utterly gentle by a baby's grip. He sang to James in a surprisingly melodic voice, silly songs he made up about cows and horses and the wide Nevada sky. As spring arrived and James grew bigger and stronger, Victoria began to feel like herself again. The household settled into new rhythms, adapting to include the tiny person who had joined their lives. Frank and Tommy were both charmed by the baby, taking turns entertaining him when Victoria needed a moment to herself. One warm May evening, Victoria and Ben sat on the porch together, watching the sunset. James was asleep in his cradle inside, and for the first time in weeks, they had a moment of quiet together. "You ever regret it?" Ben asked suddenly. "Answering my advertisement, coming all this way to marry a stranger." Victoria turned to look at her husband, taking in the face that had become so dear to her. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "I came here expecting to fulfill a duty, to play a role in exchange for security. What I found instead was everything I never knew I wanted: a true home. A partner who respects and cherishes me, love beyond anything I had imagined, and now our beautiful son." She reached over to take his hand. "You have given me the world, Ben Zachary." Ben brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You gave me the world first. This ranch was just land and buildings before you came. You made it a home, filled it with warmth and laughter and love. You gave me a family. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving and building wealth. You gave me a reason to want to build something lasting, something I can pass on to our son and hopefully other children in the future." "Other children?" Victoria asked with a smile. "You want more?" "If you do," Ben said. "I know childbirth is hard on women, dangerous even. I would never ask you to risk yourself if you did not want to. But if you are willing, I would love to fill this house with children, to build a real legacy together." "I would like that," Victoria said softly. "I would like James to have siblings, to grow up in a house full of love and laughter." As if summoned by their talk, a cry came from inside the house. Victoria started to rise, but Ben gestured for her to stay seated. "I will get him. You rest." Victoria watched through the window as Ben lifted James from the cradle, cradling him against his chest and swaying gently. The crying stopped almost immediately, and she could see Ben talking to the baby, probably telling him about the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The sight filled Victoria with such contentment that she felt her eyes sting with tears. She had come to Nevada expecting nothing more than survival, a roof over her head and food in her belly in exchange for keeping house and providing companionship. What she had found instead was everything she had never dared to dream of. A man who loved her not for her beauty or her accomplishments, but for herself. A man who valued her thoughts and opinions, who made her laugh and held her when she cried. A man who was building a life with her, not just using her to maintain his household. Their life together was not always easy. The ranch work was hard and often dangerous. There were droughts that withered the grass and made water scarce. There were harsh winters when the snow piled so high they could not leave the house for days. There were cattle rustlers and predators and 1,000 other challenges that came with frontier life, but they faced everything together. When times were hard, they supported each other. When money was tight, they made do with what they had. When dangers threatened, they protected each other and their growing family. James was joined by a daughter, Emily Rose, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas Frank, named for their loyal ranch hand, 2 years after that. The house that had once seemed so large and empty filled with the sounds of children playing, of laughter and sometimes tears, of life being fully lived. Ben expanded the ranch gradually over the years, his herd growing from 200 head to nearly 500. He hired more hands, built a larger barn, and improved the house, adding on a parlor and another bedroom as the children grew. But he never lost sight of what mattered most: his family. Victoria found her own ways to contribute beyond housekeeping. She started a small business making preserves and pickles, selling them in town and to other ranches. The income was modest, but it gave her a sense of independence and accomplishment. She also became known throughout the region for her literacy, and she began teaching reading and writing to anyone who wanted to learn, children and adults alike. A small schoolhouse was eventually built in Winnemucca, and Victoria served on the board that hired teachers and set curriculum. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. First steps and first words, horses to learn to ride and chores to be done. Birthdays and Christmases and ordinary Tuesdays that were made special simply by being together. Frank retired eventually, his body worn out by decades of hard labor, but he remained close to the family, living in a small house Ben built for him near the main house. He became a beloved grandfather figure to the children, telling them stories of the old days and teaching them card games and whittling. Tommy married a girl from town, a sweet-natured woman named Alice, and Ben helped him buy a small spread of his own nearby. The two families remained close, their children growing up together, and Tommy continued to help out at Ben's ranch during the busy seasons. Through it all, Victoria and Ben's love only deepened. They still made time for each other, even with the demands of ranch and family. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when weather permitted, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They still came together in the night, their passion tempered by familiarity but no less intense for it. On their 10th anniversary, Ben surprised Victoria with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Sarah and her family and took the train west. For one magical week, they stayed in a hotel with running water and gas lights, ate in restaurants where someone else did the cooking, and walked along the waterfront hand in hand like young sweethearts. "This is wonderful," Victoria said as they stood on the dock, watching ships come and go in the harbor. "But I miss our children terribly." "Is that foolish?" "Not foolish at all," Ben said, pulling her close. "I miss them too. I miss James asking me about everything he sees. I miss Emily's laugh. I miss Thomas following me around like a little shadow." He kissed the top of her head. "I love that you wanted to give me this time away, but I think we both know where we really want to be." They went home a day early, unable to stay away from their family any longer. The children greeted them with shrieks of joy, all three of them trying to hug their parents at once. That night, as they tucked the children into bed, Victoria looked at Ben over Emily's sleeping form and saw her own contentment reflected in his eyes. The children grew into remarkable young people. James inherited his father's love of the land and his mother's intellectual curiosity, devouring every book he could get his hands on while learning every aspect of ranch management. Emily was spirited and independent, with a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Ben's considerable skill. Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, but possessed a kindness and steadiness that reminded Victoria of Ben at his best. As the children grew older and more independent, Victoria and Ben found themselves with more time together again. They took long rides across the ranch land, sometimes packing a lunch and making a day of it. They would sit under the shade of a cottonwood tree by the creek that ran through their property, eating sandwiches and talking about the future. "Can you believe we have been married over 20 years?" Victoria asked one afternoon, lying with her head pillowed on Ben's thigh while he leaned against the tree trunk. "Some days it feels like yesterday that I saw you on that train platform," Ben said, running his fingers through her hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver. "Other days, I can hardly remember what my life was like before you. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not answered your advertisement, if someone else had come instead?" Ben was quiet for a moment, considering. "I used to think about that sometimes in the early days." But honestly, Victoria, I cannot imagine my life with anyone but you. It feels like we were always meant to find each other, one way or another. Like all the hard times and losses we both suffered were leading us to that moment on the platform. I feel the same way, Victoria said softly. I came here broken and desperate, expecting nothing but survival. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope and dream and love. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Ben corrected. You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was so lonely before you came, Victoria. I had the ranch and the work, but I had no real purpose beyond survival and building wealth. You gave me something to build for, someone to share it all with. You made me want to be better, to create something that would outlast us both. Victoria sat up and turned to face him. Even after 20 years, the sight of his face could still make her heart skip. There were lines now around his eyes and mouth, and his hair was graying at the temples, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. More so, because now she knew the man beneath the weathered exterior, knew his kindness and his strength and his unwavering devotion. I love you, Benjamin Zachary, she said, cupping his face in her hands. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Victoria Zachary, he replied, pulling her close. You are the best decision I ever made, the best thing that ever happened to me. They kissed there under the cottonwood tree, the same passion that had brought them together still burning bright despite the years. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ben laughed softly. We should probably head back before one of the children comes looking for us. Probably, Victoria agreed, but she made no move to get up. Just a few more minutes. I want to remember this moment, this perfect afternoon. They stayed a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the rustle of leaves and the burble of the creek, surrounded by the land they had built their life on together. As the children reached adulthood and began making their own paths in the world, Victoria and Ben found new rhythms to their life together. James married a teacher from town, a smart and capable woman named Margaret, and Ben deeded him a portion of the ranch to start his own herd. They built a house on the far side of the property, close enough to help out when needed but far enough for independence. Emily shocked everyone by announcing she had no intention of marrying, at least not anytime soon. Instead, she wanted to start a horse breeding program, focusing on sturdy, intelligent horses suited to ranch work. Ben, to his credit, supported her completely, helping her build her own stable and corrals and trusting her judgment on breeding stock. Victoria was proud beyond measure of her daughter's independence and drive. Thomas decided ranching was not for him. He wanted to be a doctor, to help people in a different way. It took some scrimping and saving, but Ben and Victoria managed to send him to medical school in San Francisco. He wrote home often, his letters full of his studies and his dreams of returning to practice in Nevada, where doctors were desperately needed. With the children grown and pursuing their own dreams, Victoria and Ben found themselves in a new chapter of their life together. They were grandparents now, James and Margaret having blessed them with 2 grandchildren, with more surely to come. Victoria delighted in spoiling her grandchildren, baking them treats and telling them stories, while Ben taught them to ride and to appreciate the land. But they also rediscovered each other in new ways. They traveled more, taking trips to places they had only read about. They went to Denver and saw the mountains. They visited the California coast and marveled at the Pacific Ocean. They even made it to Chicago once, though they both agreed the city was too crowded and noisy for their taste. Always, they were glad to return home to Nevada, to the ranch and the wide open spaces. This was where they belonged, where they had built their life together. On their 30th anniversary, their family threw them a huge celebration. People came from all over the region, friends and neighbors and business associates, all wanting to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There was music and dancing, enough food to feed an army, and speeches that made both Victoria and Ben blush. But the best moment came later, after the guests had gone home and the children had left for their own houses. Victoria and Ben sat on their porch, just as they had countless times before, watching the stars come out. 30 years, Ben said wonderingly. 3 decades of marriage, and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not even know what love was on our wedding day, Victoria said with a laugh. I was so nervous I could barely think straight. You hit it well, Ben said. You seemed so calm and composed. I was terrified, Victoria admitted. I was marrying a stranger, moving to a place I had never been, with no idea if I would be safe or happy or anything. It was the biggest leap of faith I have ever taken. And would you take that leap again, knowing what you know now? Victoria turned to look at her husband, this man who had been her partner through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard. In a heartbeat, she said firmly. I would take that leap 1,000 times over, because it brought me to you, to this life, to our family. It brought me home. Ben pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the life they had built. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving. Their children were happy and successful, following their own dreams while remaining close to their family. Grandchildren played in the yard where their own children had once played. Victoria thought back to that frightened young woman who had stepped off the train in Winnemucca 30 years ago, expecting nothing but duty and obligation. She had found so much more than that. She had found love, true and deep and lasting. She had found partnership and respect and passion. She had found a place where she belonged, where she was valued not for what she could provide but for who she was. And she had found all of it in the eyes of a frontier cowboy who had looked at her on a dusty platform and seen not just a mail-order bride to fulfill a practical need, but a woman worthy of devotion. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. They lost Frank to old age, mourning the man who had been a friend and mentor. They celebrated as Thomas returned from medical school and set up practice in Winnemucca, quickly becoming one of the most respected doctors in the region. They welcomed more grandchildren, each one a blessing and a delight. As Victoria and Ben themselves grew older, they gradually handed more of the ranch operations to James and his growing family. Ben still rode out to check on things, still offered advice and pitched in when needed, but he was content to let the younger generation take the lead. Victoria's hair turned fully silver, and Ben's joints grew stiff in the cold weather. But they remained devoted to each other, their love a constant in a changing world. They still made time for their sunset vigils on the porch. They still reached for each other in the night. They still found ways to make each other laugh and to support each other through difficulties. On a warm spring evening, 42 years after Victoria first stepped off that train, they sat together on their porch as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter ringing out across the ranch. "Did you ever imagine we would make it this far?" Victoria asked, her hand clasped in Ben's, their fingers intertwined as naturally as breathing. "I hoped," Ben said softly. "When I saw you on that platform, something in me recognized something in you. I did not know what it was then, but I hoped it meant we would have a chance at something real." "We got more than a chance," Victoria said. "We got a lifetime. A beautiful, full, wonderful lifetime." Ben raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just as he had done countless times over the decades. "And I would not change a single moment of it. Every joy, every challenge, Every ordinary day, they all led us here. To this moment, to this life we built together. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sun sink lower. I love you, Ben. I have loved you for so long now that I cannot remember what it felt like not to love you. And I love you, Victoria. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. My partner, my love, my home. They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, with the legacy they had created together. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all carrying forward the love and values that Victoria and Ben had built their lives upon. It had started with a letter, with a desperate woman answering an advertisement placed by a lonely rancher. It had started with expected duty, with practical arrangements and carefully written correspondence. But what it had become was so much more than either of them could have imagined. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. That devotion discovered in the eyes of a frontier cowboy could transform a life, could create a legacy that would endure for generations. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars shone bright above the Nevada desert, Victoria and Ben Zachary sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the family and the life and the love they had built together from nothing but hope and faith, and the courage to take a chance on each other. It was, Victoria thought, more than enough. It was everything.